Yep, thanks for the introduction. I've got quite a fefew slides, so I'll kind of spin through the ones that are just a bit of background so that we can focus hopefully a little bit more on the more interesting stuff. It's the Swedish Winter Sports Research Centre where I work is part of Mid Sweden University, so it might be a scenario where you guys have got kind of a test centre. We don't really have an exact, I wouldn't say, equivalent in the UK. There's no EIS in Sweden. We have the Swedish Olympic Committee, and we have something called Riksidrottsförbund, which is like the national kind of sports governing bodies. But there's no sports science kind of support system as you're used to here in this country. So I would say that we work quite in that way for winter sports. And I'll focus a little bit on the type of sports that we work with mostly. Östersund, the town where the centre is based. I struggle to speak English now, by the way. I am from South London, but it will take a while. Yeah, the town is about 550 k's north of Stockholm, so it's kind of smack bang in the middle of Sweden. I did my undergraduate at Loughborough, that was another one. It's kind of the equivalent. It's kind of this little bubble that's full of elite athletes in the middle of the country, about as far from the sea as you can get. That's how it looks for 6 months of the year. That's about how it looks today. You'll recognise that, Charlie. We went mountain biking a couple of weeks ago around here, and it's beautiful. It's really stunning. So it's a cool place to visit. It's a great place to kind of work and be based for a period of time. Probably not forever. I'm not sure about that. We're very isolated, and that creates a lot of opportunities. So it's kind of plus minus. We are a world-leading university. That's not just a throwaway thing, but I would say we're the world-leading research centre when it comes to snow sports. So cross-country, biathlon and alpine skiing, which includes ski cross. We do produce, like, without question, the most amount of research in those kind of sports. And we've got really unique facilities and really unique kind of geography, but we've also got all the athletes based there. It's not like some of the EIS setups where the coaches are there and they say the whole team has to base here. Sweden's a lot more flexible, I guess, or they don't kind of instill rules on their athletes. But anyway, almost all of the skiers and the biathletes live in our town. And some of these pictures and stuff I'll go into a little bit more detail about what we actually do with them. But just a quick overview of how the research centre runs. We're part of the Department for Health Sciences, where we have sports science education programmes, public health and rehabilitation sciences, and then we have this research centre as well. That's just the way that the university is structured. And I'm the director of that research centre. And we focus primarily on research and its research output that kind of gives us our funding. But we're also an Olympic test centre for the winter sports, and wherever in education there, that's not kind of the education of an undergraduate and a master's kind of programme. It's that we disseminate our work, we educate the elite coaches in our sports, we have a conference, for example, but I'll come back to those things. And our focus sports are cross-country skiing, biathlon, alpine including ski cross, and then we've got a large focus on parasport as well. So within all of those disciplines, we work with all of the para-athletes in Sweden, but also internationally. So we've just put in a big grant we work together with the International Paralympic Committee, and they have kind of set up a expert competence centre in our labs together with the sports tech group. And that's kind of an international, I forget all my words. It's like it's an international project that we do together with the International Paralympic Committee. So that's kind of, that's quite a big part of what we do as well. Like I said, I'm going to fly through these intro ones just to give you a background of how it's structured and what it looks like, and then we'll focus more on the interesting stuff. We don't only produce research on winter sports. So, for example, when I moved there 7 and a bit years ago, I came from doing a teaching fellowship at Bath, where I'd worked for 2 years as a lecturer. And there I raced in triathlon. Saw a para triathlon t-shirt there. Or is it triathlon?
Pentathlon.
Oh shit! Damn it. Sorry, I can't see from here. Well, a couple of them go in anyway in triathlon. But yeah, I'm racing triathlon. I had a few triathlete students there, so I've kind of published in triathlon with my masters in Australia with Dave. Then I was like an elite soccer player, and I studied a lot and published a lot in soccer and have carried that on as well. And we'll come on to a few of those. But colleagues of mine as well have, orienteering is huge in Sweden. We've done some work with mountain biking, kayaking. I mean, there's a whole bunch of examples. So we're not bound to only work with winter sport athletes. We can work and produce whatever research that we want, or we can do mechanistic studies that can apply to any type of athletes and sports. But I would say that we're very applied in our kind of focus and outputs. But we do produce a lot of published work. I would say we're a very small group. Here's kind of how our setup is and what our aims and goals are. I've been the director of the centre for 2 years, so everything that I'm showing you are things that I've developed for the centre. This is not at all how it looked when I took over. It was quite different. We're just isolated researchers. But now we're a big team. Would you say, Charlie, we're a nice team, aren't we, I think?
Yeah, and you have those nice Bath University
yeah,
as well.
Placement students, yeah. So I don't know if you guys know about the Bath setup for the undergraduate programme, but they read the sports science students. Are you guys all right with the sun? It's killing you. They read 2 years of undergraduate sports science, then they have a placement year, then they go home and read their final year. And because I worked at Bath before I came to Östersund, I knew of the programme and have had a placement student every year. And it's just excellent because they're really good, and we get them in the lab doing lots of testing. And our one now, I got him to lead the whole kind of basis accreditation project with a lot of support, but they're really good. So that's what this refers to here. We have about 8 to 10 funded researchers in the town where I live, and that will be kind of the lecturers. So I'm employed as, essentially my employment is a university lecturer. But then I work with the centre. Actually, most of my job kind of is bought out by the centre. And all of our lecturers, we're about 8 or 10. We're not that many more. We're quite a small department with few students. All of them have got time where their research work is conducted through the research centre. And our money is applied for, and we get a lot of regional funding as well into the centre. So that's kind of how it's structured. We collaborate with lots and lots of different groups internationally and within Sweden. I have employed now last autumn 2 PhD students. Sweden's very different. There's very few PhD students because they have to have a full salary. PhD students are salaried as if they're regular employees, and they have all benefits that employees have with pension schemes and holidays and so on. So they're considered employees in Sweden. So that's actually, it sounds great for all of you PhD students sitting here thinking, oh my God, that's amazing. It means there's barely any PhD students. That's the downside. We have test leaders who run all of our Olympic testing that I'll come on to as well. And then we work closely with the elite sports. I'm going to flip through these really quickly. It's just to show that we are aligned with the sports science programme. It's the same individuals. I have been the programme leader on this programme. I've kind of taught on or run most of those courses on there. Now I have so little teaching time left that I kind of supervise here, and that's about it. And I do a little bit. Training science is my kind of main specialism, and we have that as a kind of core theme throughout the course, this training science in each of the years. But otherwise it looks the same as your programs would look like with nutrition and with psych. Psych is our what do you call it, B-ämne, like minor kind of thing. So they have 30 credits of sports psychology out of 180, and we have to have something with 30 credits that's not sports science for them to get a full degree. But that's just a bit of details. But otherwise I think it looks like a regular programme. It's a 3-year bachelor's course. Then we have this 1-year master, which is international, and it's actually distance. I didn't write that on there. It's actually online based with visits. There's 4 visits per year within the year. So this is a really nice programme because we run it full-time and half-time. So quite a lot of people who work read this from a distance at half speed. They come up for our residential weekends. one per course. We have 4 taught courses over the first year. If you do it full time, you do your dissertation project in parallel. Otherwise, you just do your dissertation project in the second year. And that's nice because that's a focus on performance optimization in elite sport. And then the final program that we kind of run is this very flexible Master by Research. And that's a 2-year full-time, as you would know a master's to be. This other one here is not equivalent to a British master's, it's half. In Sweden it's called Magister. I don't think you have it here in the UK anymore, maybe back in the day. But this is a full master's. It's how I did my master's actually with Dave. You would find a supervisor and you would kind of be immersed into their kind of research projects. So you basically need to, it's more like a miniature PhD, I would say. Not quite an MPhil. You still read taught courses, but you're quite immersed into a research project. I've got one starting with me in September when I go back, and he'll be working with me, for example. I've just taken this up as an example. We've got 2 world champs in 2019. We got biathlon in our town, and then the biggest ski resort in Sweden, which is the World Cup hill in Åre. That's like an hour away, and we've got the Alpine world champs as well. So that's really cool for our region. I mean, that's pretty massive to have 2 world champs within the space of 4 weeks in February and March of next year. So we at the university are actually working quite a lot with these events in terms of doing all various types of research. But I've got a Master by Research student who will come in working with my 2 PhD students, together with me and a colleague of mine. And we're looking at really developing and adapting the ski stadium that we've got in town. And developing an app, and it will be kind of like a Strava for skiing type thing, because nothing exists in that way. So yeah, I don't need to go into the details of that, but that's kind of just one project of, I think, about 20 that I've got kind of up in the air, and we've got quite a few different things obviously going on. So this is just one of them. Yeah, and this is they've kind of created this World Championship region with a legacy as well for the future. So it's quite a vibrant and growing area in this Mid-Sweden band, and it goes from Trondheim in Norway all the way across the region, and there's kind of big interreg projects connecting all these regions as well. So the good thing about up there, it is very isolated, but it creates a lot of opportunity. And if you're ambitious and you've got a lot of drive, then you can basically do anything. So you were saying, Charlie, I've managed to make quite a lot of steps. If you kind of get your head down and do work, it's a bit of a sleepy place. So you can have a really big impact if you've got some ideas. So I think that's quite exciting. And yeah, we have a lot of our students, for example, will go out into the field and work very practically, very applied. She did a Master by Research with us, and she now works as the head coach for the junior development cross-country ski team. She did her undergraduate with us and worked as a ski coach. She was an elite skier, and now she's kind of like Gabby Logan kind of thing. This is like BBC, SVT, the Swedish television. This guy's head of, he did a master magister, this 1-year master with us, and his undergraduate. Then he worked as a test leader in the lab with us, and now he works as head of development with the Biathlon Federation. These 2 people, I don't know if you've heard of Östersund FK, the football team who beat Arsenal in earlier this year. I'm an Arsenal fan, but I was more of an Östersund fan that day. We had an English guy who moved to town about the same time as me, within a couple of weeks of me, and he took over the football club. So he was there for 7 years and took them from the 4th tier in Swedish football, which is literally on the ground, up to their kind of Premier League. They won the kind of FA Cup. They made it to the Europa League. They beat Galatasaray and PAOK, and then played the group games against Bilbao and Berlin, and they went through, and then they played Arsenal and got knocked out over 2 legs. And he's just been recruited to Swansea, so he's your new Swansea manager for any football fans. So that's a really cool story. But my first postdoc project when I moved there was with him and the football team. So there's a couple of players now at the World Cup, actually, one for South Korea and one for Iran, who come from our club. who were in my first training study with this little club, like in the middle of snowy Sweden. So it's just cool stories like that. And this is a couple of our students. He's now the head goalkeeper coach stroke sports scientist. It's a tiny club with no resources. They don't have sports scientists, so he kind of works, he's a goalkeeper by trade, and also kind of inputs into their sports science. And she did her placement there, and she's really smart, and she did lots of kind of rehab work with them. And this guy here, he did his undergrad with us, and now he's head of both the ski university alpine team and also the para alpine team in Sweden. So he's just spent 4 weeks in Pyeongchang at the Paralympics. So there's just kind of a lot of opportunities, and if you're in winter sports, you're based at our place, and then there's a lot of opportunities for those athletes afterwards. For those students, sorry, afterwards. I was thinking double there because I was thinking about, I'm going to skip over this video, just I'm thinking about time, but I can make these available. What I wanted to take up here was our university, Mid Sweden University, also has this ski university associated to it. So I don't know how the setup is here officially in the UK generally, but as an elite athlete you can go to university and study. I don't know how flexible the learning solutions are or what the universities are obliged to do, but where we are, we kind of have a contract with the Ski Federation and the Biathlon Federations, where we give these athletes flexible solutions. So they can kind of have extended deadlines, they can write their exams from training camp or competition overseas. For example, we're smiling. What have you got some examples? Are you actually a pentathlete?
Yeah, but the universities here don't really.
Yeah, and is that just this one, or is that generally in the UK? Yeah, yeah, okay.
But,
because
in their defence, I don't really ask them. So.
Yeah, okay. Because I know that there's a lot of work being done through the EU about this dual career kind of pathway, because there's just so much evidence showing that you guys, I'll group you in there, are actually contributing a lot to society afterwards. Like you guys will, or that successful athletes have the same kind of attributes in a business world or in a working world in terms of motivation and commitment and ambition and so on. But that's basic. There's a lot of, but in Sweden, just to take the example a bit further, in Sweden now they've developed a system called National Sports Universities, of which we are one, and there's four others. There's Umeå, and then the other three are actually paired because alone they're kind of not strong enough. So in Stockholm there's two, in Gothenburg there's two, and way down south in Lund and Malmö, in Skåne, there's two together, and they create these kind of national sports universities. And those 5 groupings, universities or groups of universities, are driving forward the programme to develop like this dual career pathway. So it's kind of quite new. They started that in 2015. And we have a big focus on the ski athletes, but we're also obliged, any athlete at all doing any sport, if they meet the criteria of the National Sports Federation in Sweden, which is that if you're an individual athlete, you have to be on a development programme identified by your governing body that you've got the potential to be an elite medal winner on the world stage. And if it's a team sport, then you have to be playing in the top league in the country, for males or females. And then we support them with these kind of flexible like solutions. And just stuff like they get access to the gym, and they have we have a contract with a rehab company in town, for example, so they get half price rehab or clinic like naprapath, chiropractor, all these kind of services. But anyway, if you're interested in that, there's actually just a really nice Eurosport in English clip. It's about, I don't know, 4 minutes or something, and it's of our university. It's in the building where I work, and then it's out in the biathlon stadium, and it's with our students who are dual career students. One of his parents is English, so his English is kind of perfect. Everyone else's English is also perfect, actually, more or less. But yeah, it's just nice. So if you want to get an idea of how it works, then there's a clip there. But I'll skip over it just for the sake of time for now. I mentioned education, which is an arm of what we work on besides research and testing. We had the first conference up in Åre at this National Ski Stadium in October, and that's something that we're going to continue now, and we're working together with Trondheim in Norway and North University in Norway and us. We're all kind of in line in this region, and we will have this conference every other year but together. So next year Nord Universitet in the North University will run that conference, and the following year probably Trondheim, and then we take it on again. But the whole point of the conference, and that was just something that I wanted to do, I mean, it's going to be the same for you probably, but when you haven't got, especially when you haven't got an Institute of Sport, there's kind of, and I think even if you have, that I don't like to use necessarily the word gap or that you need this bridge, but it's kind of difficult integrating, I would say, science and practice always. You've always got to have like a trade-off. If you go from extreme and mechanistic science all the way to the far end of applied sport and winning medals, they're quite far apart from each other. I would say that the research that we do is quite in the middle of that kind of continuum, but still the coaches think that we're talking like rocket scientists. Like they kind of, it's still not necessarily always relevant to them, the fact that we have to get we have to do statistical analyses and we have to get articles out. So this conference was quite nice because we had coaches and athletes, we had scientists who are all applied scientists and work as well as coaches or practitioners, and we had athletes talking as well, so it was quite a nice model. So it was just to give an example of that. And yeah, we just have recently started running this elite coach education program for the ski and the biathlon federations. They now go through, I would say, it's kind of like a miniature version. They do it over 2 years, half time, and it's kind of like a spread out sports science degree, but it's obviously much less deep. It's a third of a degree. So we kind of have nutrition and we have training sciences and we have a bit of research methods, but I would say it's more like how to just go into PubMed, how to read articles, how to interpret articles, how to set up your own kind of small scale studies out in the field, for example. So that's something that we just started this spring actually, and it will go over 2 years as a trial and will continue in the future. These are our labs. So I guess there's some things there that you wouldn't have seen, and I've got some better pictures in a minute, so I'm going to skip through these because I've got better pictures and things in action of actual studies. But basically we test the alpine skiers, the biathletes and the cross-country skiers twice per year. Once in kind of May, June time, which is at the end of their season, beginning of their new training season, so it's kind of off-season. And then once again in October, November, which is end of pre-season, pre-race season. And we do bespoke testing depending on the sport. So for the cross-country skiers and the biathletes, we'll do like a sub-max ramp test for thresholds. And then we've actually changed the VO2 max test, where we now run a performance time trial, where we get VO2 max, we get pacing, we get anaerobic contributions. And then for the cross-country skiers, we then do a 30-second all-out double poling test, which I've got a bit of a video of. So that's kind of explosive power. So it's a bit like a Wingate, but with a double poling machine on a concept, adapted concept ergo. And then with the biathletes, we do actually a fatigue shooting test. With the alpine skiers, it's lots of that. We do a bike max test. And then we do lots of jumping tests on the force plates and fast feet tests and balance tests. We had the most successful Winter Olympics ever in Pyeongchang this year, so that was cool for us. Not in terms of total medals, I think at Sochi we won 1 more medal, but we had more golds this year. And actually all of them except for 2, which was curling, men's and women's, are directly athletes that we're working with testing and research projects. So for us that's great, it's all of our athletes. So I think we're having a big impact on on these particular sports. Curling is also strong in Sweden, and we won one medal at the Paralympics, Winter Paralympics, and he's a cross-country skier, and he's a guy that's been in the national team previously for cross-country skiing as well. So he's based in our place. Like literally, this guy, he's blind, obviously, and I'll come out of my office and kind of trip over. He sets up his, he's got like a laser shooting, because he also trains biathlon as well. He does both. He's got this kind of laser shooting thing, you know, the corridor upstairs. I'll come out of the office and he's like lying at the floor there, and the laser shots is down there, and he's just shooting in the corridor. And you can do that kind of in and out of the labs to train. That's a bit of background. I know it was really high speed, but that's just a bit of background about our centre, how it fits into the university, into the sports science programmes and so on. Now I thought I'd just cross over to a little bit more specifics of some research projects that we've done, lots of kind of pictures. The next slide, I'm preparing it because it's a video and sometimes it comes up mega loud. Or other times there's no sound at all. It doesn't matter, because actually the sound on this is just going doo, 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 as he's roller skiing. This was this is Bengt Saltin, actually. It was the last biopsies he ever took. He employed me to this place. He recruited me to this centre. He was the guy who kind of founded the centre. If you don't know Bengt Saltin, then Charlie, you haven't been teaching them correctly, or you guys. No, but what I was going to say was when I moved there to do a 2-year postdoc, and I had 2 postdoc studies. Both of them were training studies. One was with the football team that I mentioned already. That was kind of concurrent training, strength and endurance, but at a very applied level. So I would say the strength training was very applied to the needs of soccer players. So was the endurance training. It wasn't at all extreme. It was very applied to their needs in that we looked at, they had 1 session a day in the evening for 2 hours. That was their training, because they were all working full time, these players, down in the 4th division at that time. So we were looking at which part of their training they did in the first hour or the second hour. Not surprisingly, it made no difference, because it was so very applied. But my other postdoc study was a training study with the with the cross-country skiers. It was a collaboration with this. This is ski gymnasium. It's like German word for high school. So they also support the athletes. They kind of at Sollefteå, which is quite near to us, they have biathlon and cross-country skiing. And they kind of have training sessions in the morning from 8 till 11 or so, and then all of their classes are put in the afternoons or later in the morning in the afternoons. So it's kind of like a flexible system even from that age, and that's when they're 16. So lots of kids in Sweden, actually even if they're not athletes, lots of kids in Sweden at age 16 move away from home, because it's such a sparsely populated country that they won't have like a high school or a university in their little town. But more or less all of the skiers and the athletes that go to these kind of sports high schools, they'll move away. So they kind of go into training camp when they're 16, and if they go on to university, that can go on until they're kind of 24, 25. So this is the size of our treadmill in our main lab. This guy is Jürgen Brink. So I did the study actually with 16 to 20-year-old students, these guys here, plus him. And at the time he was 37, 38. Now he's 44. And he just asked to be in. He said, I want to try this. I want to know how my body responds to this. He'd had biopsies when he was 18. He'd been in the national team. He's won Olympic medals and world championship medals. And at this point in his career, now he'd gone into like long distance skiing. So if you know of Vasaloppet, he's won Vasaloppet many times. He's 44 and he came 4th this year. Vasaloppet is 90 Ks of skiing, and it's a bit like a bike race. Like it's the Mark Cavendish that wins. You'll go in a klunga, yeah, kind of. They don't call it a peloton, but in a peloton. So there's many of them, like the best ones. It's one of these, it's like London Marathon, there's gazillions of people. That the princess's sister's done it. Kate. Pippa Middleton, she's done it. Anyway, at the end it's just an all-out sprint, so you've got to be extremely explosive. Yeah, but that was just interesting because he wanted to get muscle biopsies 20 years later and compare how his fibre types were looking like and stuff. So yeah, this was a really in-depth study. I had 24 elite athletes, and it was a crossover training study where we looked at, we had pre, post, we only had a few days kind of washout, I wouldn't even say. Logistically, it's hard. I had to find 8 weeks in a ski season. Well, it was off season. We did it in April, May time, just at the end of the season. But you've got to find 8 weeks where you can fully control 24, 25 athletes. That's not very easy. But it was good. We had 12 and 12 males and females, plus this guy as kind of a case study. He's not in the papers because he's 20 years older than all the rest of them. I'm not going to go into all the details because you can read the papers for that, but we looked at anaerobic contributions to just some of the lab tests that we did that had never been done in skiing. But then obviously we looked at the effects of the training intervention. Just a quick outline because you might be interested. It was a high intensity kind of training study, and it was a block training study. So we looked at it was exactly the same sessions and training load, exactly the same training sessions, but we looked at different distributions. So in the traditional training distribution, they did 3 high intensity sessions per week. All the rest of their training was low intensity. They do very high volumes in general, these athletes. And then the crossover, the other intervention was the block intervention. They did 0 high intensity, 9 in week 2, and then 0 again. So it was looking at, because there's quite a lot of work, especially by the Norwegian guys, Benther and Estad, looking at showing that with cyclists, showing that block training has a bigger impact actually. We didn't see any effect at all of blocking. We didn't see any negative effects as well. We looked at quite a lot of stuff. We looked at cortisol, testosterone, saliva and muscle biopsies. They didn't have greater tendencies for sickness either with the block, which I was quite surprised about, and they tolerated it. And we did the rest Q questionnaire, so we looked at kind of stress as well. They handled it quite well. So kind of the conclusion in the paper is a little bit that this is doable. It wasn't better. Whether it was not better because of the time of the season, or because they're well trained, or because it wasn't extreme or long enough, or there's a whole bunch of factors we could discuss. But one thing that they did come back, if you were thinking about doing it, one thing that they did come back and kind of say anecdotally was that when they had 0 high intensity sessions and then they did their post tests, so there might have been 9 or 10 days since their last high intensity session, they felt really lethargic coming into the lab, having had a mega week with 9 sessions. So they did double session, single session, day off, double session, single session in 7 days. And then had kind of 7 days of just low intensity training, and then maybe a couple of days biopsy or getting into the lab or whatever. And then, yeah, they just felt they didn't feel like fresh for high intensity work. Just a little anecdote. This was one of the girls in that study, and then she was 16, and this was her in Pyeongchang this spring, and she's 22. And I just like this example. She's a student of ours. She was a student at Sollefteå. Now she's at the university studying. She was completely not expected to win gold in an individual pursuit race. So kind of an individual time trial is how they run it. So that was amazing. But it's just been cool to see her progress. And I was just thinking about, I'll run through this now because there's quite a few studies that are applied that are quite kind of interesting to refer to. She was also in this study that we did. I quite like this one because we did this in August, and it was kind of like it was July, August last year, so a year ago. I found out I was going to do it in about the beginning of June, and it was like during all my summer holidays, but we did it anyway. And it was a collaboration with Gothenburg and some scientists at Gothenburg. So he's like a lab test leader at Gothenburg. There's a guy writing up the paper who's he's a nutritionist at Gothenburg and also with the Swedish Olympic Committee. And he just called me up, I don't know, in sort of June time and said, oh, Kerry, the biathlon team, who I work with as the nutritionist, they want to do a study now in the summer prior to the Olympic Games. They're using this Maurten sport drink, Maurten, M-A-U-R-T-E-N. They're using it a lot with the sub 2 hour marathon projects. And yeah, it's got, is there any nutritionists in here or not? Because it's got like a different chemical structure. It's kind of got these encapsulated, it's got, the carbohydrate is encapsulated in kind of a gel coating. I've read, have you read this, have any of you read the Alex Hutchinson Endure book? There's a really good book out, and he's just a journalist and he can explain this a lot better than me. But yeah, it's just a gel structure. It encapsulates the carbohydrate, so basically it doesn't affect osmolality in the stomach to the same degree as regular sport drinks would. And anyway, the biathlon team are sponsored by them, or they use that product. They're sponsored by them, and they wanted to test this product in the cold. So we have this climate chamber in our lab. So it was kind of July, August time, and this was at -10 degrees inside here. So they're wearing all of like their winter kit. But we could do exogenous carbohydrate oxidation with this group from Gothenburg. So kind of quite mechanistic stuff that we can't otherwise do in our lab. But we've got all the athletes and they don't know how to do research with skiers kind of thing. So it was a really nice collaboration from that respect. So it was a very simple study where they did their pre-test and then they just had 2 interventions. They either had this Maurten sport drink or they had just pure placebo with no sugars at all. Obviously it would have been ideal to have them coming in 4 times and doing loads of other stuff, but this is all we could do. We had 12 of them, the 12 going to the Olympics, and this was as good as we could get. We could get them into the lab 3 times to do their pre-tests and to do their 2 trials. And they would do 2 hours on the treadmill to be kind of exhaustive at kind of 80% VO2 max. And I just think it's quite interesting because they had their drinks beforehand. They had their drinks obviously throughout the trial, whether they were getting placebo or sugar. 2 hours at quite a high intensity to be exhaustive, and then they came straight out of the lab. They quickly did a very quick change, and then we did a performance trial. So this is the double polling machine, how it looks like a little bit. It's just like a concept ergo. And the girls did 2,000 meters, the boys did 2,400 meters, and the trial was set up to be about 8 minutes long, all out performance, no feedback, just time, distance left, countdown, no time feedback, no heart rate or anything. And yeah, we're writing it up at the minute actually, and but in terms of the performance trial, not even a second. I think on average maybe 1 second maybe difference, but literally this guy had the biggest change. He's also one of our students. He had the biggest change from sugar to no sugar trial, and it was 4 seconds, and this is over 8 minutes. So it was just insane. Most of them had between 0 and 1 second difference in the performance trial. So luckily that's not my problem to interpret and write. I'm just the final author on that paper, so someone else has got that problem. But it's quite interesting that they're so efficient, actually, I think, with their energy, and that probably like 2 hours at that high intensity, because all of the physiological markers are clearly different. I mean, the study was like in terms of the carbohydrate oxidation, but performance-wise, no different with the higher carbohydrate oxidation or lower. This is that squad. So yeah, and I mean, yeah, 3 of those are our students. This is Hannah. They won the girls won the silver in the relay. The men won the gold. It was the best Olympics by a million miles for biathlon. And also this guy here won an individual silver, and he's 21 years old. So it's really exciting, I think, for us. Oh yeah, this guy, Sebastian. Some other biathlon work that we do. We have a professor an associate professor from Finland, Marko Laaksonen. He's actually leading on the biathlon research, I would say. I've done the other studies that I showed, but that's his kind of area. He's worked as the head coach for both Sweden and Finland in biathlon, so he's got a very applied background as well. This is just a setup that we've got in our lab. So we've got a double force plate here, and then we have this kind of laser system where you can look at the, do you have this in pentathlon? Yeah, where you can look at the aiming and then the shot and how the balance is affecting the aiming, for example. And that's something that we've now incorporated also into our test battery with the athletes that come in, which we weren't doing before. I'll spin through a few others. So that was kind of biathlon. I'll put that in its box. And just a few things cross country. We did a study a year and a half ago now out in the field, and this was leading up to the World Championships in Lahtis in Finland of 2017, last year. And we focused a lot, I would say, on sprint. It's quite a new discipline in cross-country skiing. It lasts about 3 minutes, so it's more like, 1,500 metre, I guess, area in terms of running, something like that, in terms of the metabolism and the demands of the sport. But anyway, we had 32 of the national team. They were on camp. This is in October in a kind of resort in the mountains in Sweden. We shipped down there with all of our gear, and they wanted to do everything. They wanted us to do everything. And the studies here are very applied, I would say. This one can be very strong. These two are very applied. This guy did an awesome job. He's an Aussie-English guy, Andrew Govers, who worked with us as a postdoc for a year. Awesome job kind of writing up a decent study out of this, I would say, because we had 32 athletes. We tried to do 3 studies on camp. They did a nutrition study, so we looked at their food intake over a 2-day period and their food intake on race day. We had a simulated World Cup sprint race on the Monday. We started working with them on the Saturday beforehand, so we did this kind of pre-study which had a nutrition focus. Then during the simulated race, we did a performance and pacing study. That should be really nice because that's got really good, clear data, because that was very easy to control. And then we did a recovery study as well, which is the one that Andy wrote up. And obviously you can imagine that a nutritional pre and a recovery post study out in the field with this kind of amount of athletes on pre-season before a world championship year is quite hard to control. So the recovery, for example, we looked at compression garments compared with neuromuscular electrical stimulation compared with a placebo. So we split these 32 into 3 groups of 10 and 11. So what, like the nutrition one, we looked at what they did before. They had this simulated race on the Monday morning. Does anyone know how a sprint race is in cross country? Yeah, some of you have got a bit of an idea, because you firstly do a prologue, which is like a time trial, individual start. All the athletes will do the prologue, and then the top 30 ranked, the ones that have the 30 best times, go into like the knockout stages, into the quarterfinals. Then the knockout stages are 6 people head to head. So there's 5 rounds of that in the quarters, and the 2 fastest from each 5 plus the 2 lucky losers, that makes 12 people, go into the semi, 2 sixes, 2 lucky losers, 6 go into the final. That's how it works. Between the prologue and the quarter is about an hour to 2 hours. Between the quarter to the semi is about 30-40 minutes, and between the semi and the final is about actually, between the quarter and the semi is shorter, maybe 30 minutes, and then maybe 15 minutes. So there's loads of challenges in terms of what do you do with these athletes. It's very cold out in the snow. What do you do between times? How do you fuel these athletes? How do you warm them up, cool them down? There's no research, nothing. So this is another good thing about like winter sports and these kind of sports. There's basically not really very much research in these areas. So that's kind of how the race looks. This is our Bath placement student. We had a different one then that you didn't meet. But this is a 20-second all-out double poling test. A lot of things, we're in this resort, we're in a little gym. That's not ideal, the way that his feet are moving like that. When we do it in the lab, they wear their ski boots, they're clicked into their bindings on a wooden panel that's bolted to the floor. So there's no movement. They have a belt, as you saw, they have a belt around their middle so that they can do the proper, like they can really lean forward into the double poling action. we didn't have those possibilities in this gym, in this resort, in the middle of nowhere. We used a jump mat. We couldn't have the force plates because we're in this gym in the middle of nowhere. And then, yeah, I would say it's a bit limited in kind of the methods that we used. Like, we didn't do this for a huge amount of time. We were limited with the amount of time with the neuromuscular electrical stimulation. The compression clothes were generic. They're sponsored by Kraft. They're not bespoke fitting, so they would just get the garments that fitted them the best, etc., etc. But I think it's nice to see kind of the study that we did. I'm going to skip through this one because this is just another study or two studies actually that I've done with the cross-country skiers. One in hypoxia, so our climate chamber is also hypoxia, that we did with beetroot juice, and one that we did with carbohydrate dosing and frequencies, because in skiing it's not like cycling or running. You have to slow down more to fuel because you're using your arms and your legs. So where you don't carry your fluids and fuels on you. You take it like in a marathon from a table, or in a World Cup race. You have your coaches giving you fuels on a 50k race, for example. But you have to stop poling. You have to stop propelling yourself forward. So we did a study looking at if they fueled less frequently with more volume compared with more frequently and less volume. But I'll just leave the references and you can post this out if you're interested in some of those things. This, obviously, there's only a couple of minutes left, so I'm not going to show this either, but this is actually really nice, except for the clip is in Swedish. It's kind of like the BBC Sport. So the girl that I showed you, who's the Gabby Logan, she's in our lab, being the TV person, and it's really good because she's not interviewing this guy, she's interviewing one of our other sprint skiers, Theodor Pettersson. He's on the treadmill. I'll explain it because if you go in then you'll understand, even though you can't understand what they're saying. But so she kind of introduces it and everything, and then she goes to Theodor, he's kind of on the thing, and then it will flip back to the screen. What we had was one of our performance analysts that works for Swedish Olympic Committee. He went out to Pyeongchang and filmed. He's an ex-elite skier. He filmed the course and had the profile of the course as well. And then when we came back to our lab, we could program our treadmill, because it's programmable, with the profile of the course, and we had the course on a big screen in front of Theodor, and you can see that in the film clip, like they'll switch back to it. You can't go downhill on our treadmill, it's flat or it's up, so when they go downhill, the coach, Ola, he's standing there with a pole, and Theodor's holding onto the pole like that, getting dragged, and he's making him do the corners and stuff, and we had our athletes training on that all year from January until they went to Pyeongchang. Yeah, then they kind of go over to talk to Ola, the coach, about what the impact of this is and so on. But it's just a nice little clip, but you won't understand it, probably most of you. But it's quite cool to watch anyway, because you'll see the goings on of the lab, you'll see the screen in front of them, how we kind of ran it in the lab, and they were just training sessions. So the fact that kind of all our athletes live in town and they can just come in and run through those things. And we won gold in sprint. She's by far the best in the world. This is Charlotte Kalle. She's except for Marit, she's the best skier kind of in the world, but over a bit longer distances. And then Charlotte and Stina, they won the silver after Norway in the team sprint. And then we won silver in the relay. And then Stina, this one here, she also won actually a surprise gold in the long distance race, which I said she's a really good sprinter. So that came down to the final spurt. Yeah. So that's quite nice to see. Alpine we also work with. We won 2 golds here as well. Like lots of things that were just not really expected. I did a collaborative study with Matt Spencer, who's in Oslo. Now he's just moved to Agder, actually, in Kristiansand, but in Norway. He's an Aussie guy that was doing his PhD with Dave when I was doing my master's. We did a warm-up study in the cold with him that he'll present at ECSS next week. And actually, the Idre Fjell field study with the performance and pacing, that will be presented at Idre also next week. And then Marco, the biathlon guy, he's at ECSS presenting on some biathlon stuff. Is anyone going to Dublin or not? No? Yeah, there's always some gang of us. Parasport, this is one of our test leaders. This is one of my researchers. She just got her PhD in March. Her PhD was looking at different sitting positions for para-athletes. And what she basically showed was that in this position, when you're not supported here, your performance is better. But the loading through your lower back and your risk for injury is a lot higher. This one had a lower injury risk, but performance was lower. So she's actually she's doing a lot of modelling, obviously, and she's a biomechanist, comes from a mathematics background. So this was a lot of, modelled data around these sitting positions. But we have access to quite a few parasport athletes as well. And we also have this sport technology department at our university, on our campus. So we work together with them quite a lot on developing different types of equipment. So they developed this prosthesis for cross-country skiing, this kind of seat for sit skiing and alpine, and this kind of stick for curling in a wheelchair, for example. But we've got quite a lot of collaborative projects with the sports tech department. I'm going to skip over this. This is just the football study, but I've talked about it. And it's 9:03, so I was going to wrap up there.